Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for your quick update on what's important in the world of work. My name is Steve Boese. Today in the Workplace Minute, we're examining how the U.S. labor market has shifted over the past year, what forces shaped employment in 2025, and what leaders should be watching as we head into 2026. Let's break it down. As we wrap up the year and take stock of the U.S. labor market, the release of the final Bureau of Labor Statistics jobs report gives us an opportunity to step back and assess where we are, how we got here, and what this may signal as we head into 2026. To understand the current condition of the labor market, it's important to start with a reset on how 2024 ended, because the story of 2025 is very much a continuation, and in some ways a correction, of those earlier trends. At the close of 2024, the U.S. labor market was still broadly healthy, though no longer running as hot as it had in the immediate post-pandemic years. The unemployment rate finished the year at roughly 4.2%, still historically low, if even slightly elevated compared to the record lows in 2023 and early 2022. Labor force participation remained relatively stable at around 62.5%, and the employment population ratio hovered just under 60%. Signaling that most Americans who wanted to work were still connected to the labor market. And over the full year, employers added more than 2 million jobs, averaging roughly 160 to 170,000 new jobs per month. And wage growth was positive, layoffs were limited outside of select industries, and there was a general sense that the labor market was cooling, but doing so in an orderly and manageable way. That context matters because 2025 marked a noticeable shift in that momentum. While the year did not bring a collapse in employment, it did bring a more meaningful slowdown. Job growth weakened significantly, particularly in the second half of the year. Monthly payroll gains became smaller and more uneven, with some months barely registering growth at all, and other months showing outright declines in jobs. And by the fall, job creation was running well below the pace seen in 2024, reflecting growing caution among employers and softer demand across several sectors of the economy. At the same time, the unemployment rate drifted higher over the course of 2025, reaching approximately 4.6% by November, and that's the highest we've seen since 2021. While that number is still low by historical standards, the direction of change is important. Rising unemployment, even gradually, often signals that labor demand is easing faster than worker supply. Labor force participation has remained fairly steady, but measures of underemployment increased, including a rise in the number of people working part-time for economic reasons. This suggests that while many workers remain employed, they were not always getting the hours or the roles that they wanted. And looking beneath the surface, the labor market in 2025 showed ever-widening disparities. Unemployment rose more sharply for some groups, particularly black workers and teenagers, which have historically been an early indicator of broader labor market stress. And industry trends also diverged. Healthcare and construction continue to add jobs, supported by demographic demand and infrastructure investments, while manufacturing, transportation, and parts of the public sector experienced ongoing job losses or stagnation, and federal government employment in particular became a drag on overall labor force growth. Complicating the picture even further was the lengthy U.S. government shutdown late in the year. The shutdown delayed the collection and release of several labor market reports, especially during the fourth quarter, which made it harder for policymakers, employers, and analysts to get a clean, real-time read on labor conditions. While the BLS ultimately released revised and catch-up data, the interruption itself underscored how fragile and dependent our economic data infrastructure can be, and how uncertain governments can spill over into business confidence and workforce planning. And several forces converged to shape the overall labor conditions in 2025. Economically, growth slowed, consumer demand softened in many areas, and many organizations shifted from aggressive hiring to a more defensive posture focused on cost control and productivity. Politically, budget battles, government spending cuts, and the federal shutdown disrupted public sector employment and injected uncertainty into many private sector planning cycles. On the monetary policy front, the Federal Reserve moved toward interest rate cuts in response to cooling labor conditions, even as officials acknowledged challenges in accurately measuring job growth in real time. And meanwhile, technology continues to reshape work. Automation, AI, digital transformation all accelerated in many industries, reducing demand for some roles while increasing demand for others, particularly in healthcare, data, and specialized professional services. global economic pressures, rapidly changing tariff policies, and ongoing trade realignments also influenced hiring decisions, especially in manufacturing and other export-oriented sectors. As we look ahead into 2026, most forecasters see the likely scenario is not a return to a white-hot labor market of a few years ago, but rather a period of adjustment and rebalancing. Unemployment may remain moderately elevated compared to its recent lows. Job growth is likely to stay uneven across many industries, and workforce planning will continue to require flexibility rather than expansion at all costs. And much will depend on economic growth, policy stability, and how quickly organizations adapt to technological change. For HR leaders heading into the new year, this calls for a thoughtful and strategic approach. Slower hiring environments place a premium on retaining key talent, investing in reskilling and upskilling, and making sure the workforce you have today is prepared for the work of tomorrow. Attention to equity and inclusion still remain essential, particularly as the labor market softening tends to disproportionately affect those already vulnerable groups. Perhaps most importantly, HR leaders will need to be disciplined consumers of labor market data, recognizing both its value and its limitations, especially in periods of political disruption and economic transitions. In many ways, the labor market story of 2025 is one of transitions. After years of volatility, rapid hiring, historical imbalances, the market is settling into a more constrained and complex phase. As we head into 2026, the challenge for leaders is not simply to react to these conditions, but to use them as an opportunity to build more resilient, adaptable, and human-centered workplaces that can thrive no matter which direction the labor market moves next. Thanks so much for listening to our 2025 labor market recap, and a big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the Workplace Minute. If this episode made you think about how the labor market in 2026 may impact your HR and talent strategies, please share it with a colleague. I'm Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H3 HR Advisors.